Hey, what's up? I'm Lauren, and I'm going to share some exercises with you to help you kind of dig into that tricep to scapula connection, how that affects our lats, all these things that we need in order to create stronger, more integrated and connected shoulders so that we can do more better things when we are hanging from an apparatus. Some things that you might want to gather before we get started. If you found tape helpful, we can do this all with tape on the arm. I'll show you how to do that again in just a second. Some other things that I'm going to be using. I've got a 10-pound weight. Doesn't have to be 10 pounds, whatever you have, or even just having something heavy. That's not a weight that you can hold on to. I've got a yoga strap. I've got a TheraBand of a resistance. It doesn't need to be super heavy. I've got some washcloths that can slide on the floor. Grab some floor sliders if you have them or whatever, just something that's going to allow you to slide without having a lot of friction. I'm also going to be doing some exercises with an anchor point. I have an anchor point that can be at variable heights. So I'm going to be using it at a few different heights. You know, maybe you're going to need to wait until you get into the gym to do some of those exercises. That's fine. Just, save this and come back to it then. And then also having something to prop under your head. You could have a small towel, you could have a larger pillow. That's really going to be dependent on you, and we'll talk about what are the variables there that you should be paying attention to. So before we get into that, if you found the tape helpful, let's put some tape on. This is KT tape that is a pre-cut strip that somebody gave to me, right? So it doesn't have to be this. You could also use Coach's tape. Having a more flexible tape like KT tape, or I use boob tape in the other video, is helpful, not required. But if we're using tape, it's going on like this. So I'm going to start putting it on that outside edge of my scapula area, or outside edge of the armpit. And I might put a little stretch into it. And then I got to kind of bend it around the corner to take it down the back of my arm. This is a much longer piece than I actually need, right? It's really just from here to here that we really want covered. If you've got some creases in the tape, it's really not a big deal. We're not using this as actual support. We're using this to give us some proprioceptive and kinesthetic awareness. So the first thing that we are going to look at today is how we breathe. And if you are familiar with me at all, you know that breath work is something that I get into. But there are real reasons why, particularly for this specific instance when we're talking about the position of the shoulders. And that is because the way that we breathe is the biggest thing that's going to affect the position of our rib cage. And the position of our rib cage is going to affect the position of our shoulders because our shoulders live on our ribs. So ideally, we're breathing in such a way that the back of our rib cage is expanding while we're inhaling. And often when we're stuck in a less functional pattern, we're lifting our rib cage up and down as we breathe, as opposed to expanding through the back. So we're going to do a couple of things to help us feel what some of that back expansion might feel like. And then we're going to start applying that to what we're doing with our shoulders. So my very favorite way to start feeling your ribs moving on the back is to just get into a child's pose. And we're going to do it with our knees together. You can lay something across your lap. I would probably use a yoga mat rather than a towel, but I had my towel nearby. And reasons why you might want something to lay across your lap is if it is uncomfortable for you to be in this extreme of hip flexion, if this doesn't feel good, then put something on your lap. We're trying to restrict the belly a little bit. You also might, if you have rib cage that really pokes forward in the front, having something on it when you're in this position might help you. So that is a factor that you can play with. But I'm just going to go like this. And I'm going to bring my head down. I'm going to make a little pillow with my hands like so. You could put a yoga block under your head. You could have your hands like this. Maybe not arms like this. Let's keep them a little bit more in. It's going to make it a little easier for us to get some movement in the back of the ribs. And then we're just going to breathe. So as you're taking these deep breaths, what you're hoping to feel is just some movement in the back here. If you're someone who wears a bra, you might feel like your rib cage is moving into or stretching your bra strap. And when we restrict our belly in this way, it really forces our air to move into our lungs in such a way that our ribs really have to expand. So we're asking the diaphragm to work in a little bit of a different way than it might if our rib cage lifts up and down. So you're just going to take some deep breaths. You're going to feel what that feels like. If you're laying there breathing and you're like, I feel like I can't breathe at all and this feels awful, or like I feel like I'm panicking, then I suggest you grab a foam roller and roll out your ribs and the sides of your ribs a bit, and then go back to it and try it again and see how it feels. After we do that, we're going to lay down on our backs. So the child's pose was kind of a passive way to start feeling the rib cage move. When we're laying down on our backs, we have to be a little more active in feeling our rib cage move. So this is where the pillows might come in handy, or something a little bit smaller to prop underneath your head. So we're going to lay down on the back. Knees can be bent. And I want you to start by just kind of holding onto the sides of your ribs. You're going to take your deep breath in. And you're going to exhale. As you exhale, I want you to gently press in and down, like you're trying to pull your rib cage down towards your hips. And rather than thinking about ribs in on the front, I want you to think about ribs down on the back into the floor. So it looks like this. And then as you inhale, keeping your hands around the sides of your ribs, you're going to notice, do my ribs want to do all of the moving in the front, up and down like that? Or can I feel my rib cage moving out to the side, kind of into the webbing of your thumbs? Or could I even feel the back of my rib cage sink down into the ground as I inhale, as well as I exhale? Now, where the pillow comes into play with this, if you're doing this and with your ribs and you start doing this with your shoulders or neck, right? Your shoulders start going forward, your neck starts lengthening, your head starts kind of tipping back, or you're feeling a lot of tension in your neck and chest, you're going to prop your head up. And you're going to do it again. And you're going to keep propping your head up until you can do this without getting all that rolling forward, neck going back, head going back tension in the front of your neck and chest. Yeah? Once you find that place, then you're just going to take some breaths and you're going to pay attention to what it feels like to feel your back move when you breathe. All right, so now that you've done a little bit of breathing, we're going to get out that yoga strap, and this is going to go on an anchor point. So I've got an anchor point that is 2 feet or so from the ground. This can go higher or lower, and that is going to be based on your active range of motion in shoulder flexion, which you might not know yet. I would say erring on the side of higher rather than lower is going to be what you're going to do. So I'm going to put my strap on the anchor point. And if you used a pillow when you are breathing, you're going to keep it when you do this. I'm going to move this big pillow and just use the towel. So you're going to lay down. You want to be in line with that anchor point, and you could give the strap a little wrap around so it's not sliding around. And then you're going to wrap your hands around the strap and start scooting away. But now I've lost my pillow. Until your arms are fully extended and suspended by the strap. So I'm really going as far away as I can. I am fully letting my arms relax so that they are fully suspended by the strap. And then I'm going to go back to those deep breaths that we were taking. Now, the important part here is the exhale. So as I'm exhaling, I'm thinking about the back of my rib cage, especially the lowest part, the part closest to my low back, sinking down into the floor, almost like it's trying to go in the opposite direction of my arms. And notice how that changes the position of my shoulders. So I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit. Here I am, where my armpits are kind of turning out to the side a little bit. And I'm going to take my inhale and exhale. And see how my arms started to turn in. Now, I didn't do that by moving my arms. I did that by moving my rib cage. I'll do it again. And then I'm just going to stay there and keep taking some of those deep breaths. And keep sinking my ribs. And maybe even scooching a little bit further away if I feel like I have a little bit of room. So what's happening when I'm doing that, or when you're doing that, is we've created another kind of passive situation for our body to start finding a position that it could be in. So I was allowing my rib cage to shift, which moved my shoulders around the sides of my ribs and brought my arms in a position to where my lats could really lengthen, my scapula could find that wrap around the sides, and I could stretch that whole line. So if you have the tape, you might notice that you felt yourself kind of turn into the tape as you were doing that. You also might have felt kind of a sense of stretch or opening in your upper back between your shoulder blades. I've definitely had people do this who felt a little bit of like spinal adjustment just through the act of breathing and letting themselves sink into that position. If you were hanging out with your armpits kind of turned out and that didn't change, then you should increase the angle. So put your anchor point higher and take yourself into a less extreme range of motion in shoulder flexion and try it again. This is telling us that maybe you don't have quite such an active range of shoulder flexion as you thought, and that you have been compensating perhaps by lifting your ribs or elevating your shoulders and creating some internal rotation. But ultimately, this position that we're trying to find here is bringing us into a really accessible place of that scap wrap with flexion. May not be like your extreme end range of motion, but towards the end range of motion, that's still kind of a manageable position for you. So once we have done this kind of more passive strategy, we're going to start working on some more active strategies. And this is where I'm going to grab my weight. So like I said, I have a 10-pound weight. It does not have to be 10 pounds exactly. That's just what I have and what feels good for me to play with this. You could hold 2 5-pound weights. You could hold a book, right? You could hold another heavy thing. I do find it a little easier to hold on to one thing instead of two things. So your hands are holding onto the same thing instead of holding two separate weights. But if that's what you have, that's what you have. And that's fine. So we're going to lay back down, holding the weight. If you were using a pillow, keep your pillow. So I'm going to reach the weight up towards the ceiling. And I'm going to start thinking about that connection into the back of my arm. Previously, I'd talked about how we push into the ground through the back of the arm. Now we're going to push up into the weight through the back of the arm. And if you've got your tape, right, you're reaching through the tape to go up. So often people do this kind of motion more from the front of the shoulder and from the chest and from the neck. And that might look a little bit more like this. And what we're looking for is something a little bit more like this. So this idea that I mentioned previously, where if you had something kind of in front of your shoulder, you're trying to go around it. So holding on to the weight with both hands, we'll inhale and exhale and find that push up. And what you hopefully notice is with that push up, you also feel your rib cage go down into the ground. And then you're going to stay there and you're going to take another breath in. And then you're going to see if you can push a little more. And maybe this changes to, instead of trying to actually move up, it feels like you're pushing into the weight to push your rib cage down more. And I notice that on my inhale, I can feel more space between my shoulder blades, like I'm able to breathe into that space more easily. And I feel the front of my rib cage sinking down, both towards the floor and towards my hip bones. So we're just going to keep breathing and keep this sense of reach. We're creating a sense of opposition, right? I'm pushing up and I'm also pushing into the ground at the same time. So if that's feeling good, then the next step is to start moving. So we're going to keep pushing up. But with that push up, I'm going to start reaching my arms overhead. I'm continuing to push away. And I'm not going to go super far. I'm going to come back up. Now, if I lose the push, it looks like this. Right? And notice how I lost that wrap around the side of the ribs. My armpit started opening out a little bit. My ribs started lifting up a little bit. When I find the push, it looks like that. So that push that we were establishing at the beginning here maintains. I'm never stopping pushing the weight up and away. Now, if you can go all the way towards your ears and maintain all of that, huzzah. And if you find that you're only getting to about here and then it all starts falling apart, right? Falling apart stuff looks like this, then you're just going to work on that. You could also decrease the weight or the resistance. So this is where a TheraBand might come in handy, and there's a couple of different ways that we could put it on us. You could put it around your back, kind of around that bra strap line, and you could hold it like this. And then I can push up into the resistance, and I've got something around my back, around my ribs, that I can push my ribs down into. And then as I'm reaching overhead, I could think about trying to reach my armpits and reach that edge of the arm or the tape towards the band. You could even give yourself a little wrap of the band around you. And this is encouraging some external rotation if we're tightening the wrap as we move. If you're letting it unwind you, then you're going to be going into internal rotation. So we're going to keep that external rotation. We're going to press up, letting the ribs sink down and reaching the armpits, reaching the tape towards the band as the arms go overhead. Things to watch out for with any of these movements, as I already said, if we're finding ourselves kind of falling out, that's not great. If the ribs are lifting up, that's not great. We also want to be paying attention to how much fatigue or tension we're feeling in the upper traps. If you're getting to a point where you feel like this is doing a lot of work, that is a pretty strong sign that we have lost the connection that we're trying to make. And I know aerialists like to try to do things as hard as they possibly can. This is not an exercise to do that with, right? And in fact, none of these exercises that I'm going to be sharing with you are going to be exercises to do that with, because as we try to change movement patterns and build proprioceptive awareness around new patterns, we need to go in with much less intensity so that we can feel the feeling that we're trying to find and then continue to reinforce that. And if we're going at our 100% capacity, we don't have a lot of opportunity or awareness to connect to those little details. So we need to take the time to lay in the foundation of details, doing less rigorous and hard work like this, so that then when we are doing the bigger, harder things, we can be aware of them as we are working with effort. So this is a type of wall push-up that's a really great way to start to connect through this line and create some stability around the tricep scapula connection. So we don't need to be way, way, way out, right? We're not trying to do the hardest possible version. I'm going to have my hands just a little bit higher than my shoulders against the wall, and I've got just a little bit of a lean into the wall. And I'm thinking about this kind of reach from the armpit and under the arm as I push my hands into the wall, just like we would be doing if we were on the floor. But there's also now a sense of like, almost like I'm trying to slide or push my hands up, but they're not moving. Then I'm going to bend my elbows, keeping my elbows kind of under my hands and in line with my shoulders. And I'm going to come back to straight. Now, what's tricky about this is I want to keep my shoulder blades pretty still on my back. So what people often do when they initiate any sort of pushing motion like this is they start by letting their shoulder blades kind of slide towards each other and letting the chest sink and then bending. And we're going to do the opposite of that. So as I push into the wall, it's like I'm trying to push my rib cage back into my shoulder blades. And then I'm going to maintain that push even while my elbows are bending. And then I'll come back up. So the way that I cue this when I'm teaching it is I put my finger right here on somebody's rib cage and I ask them to push into my finger and then to keep pushing into my finger while they're bending into the wall. So you could imagine that, or you could have somebody poke you in your ribs while you do this. But notice that this angle doesn't really change much, right? So we're really holding that tricep to scapula connection the whole time and using that to stabilize our body while our elbows bend. So most of the movement is coming from my elbow and the whole body is moving relative to that bending and straightening of the elbow. So this should feel like a lot of work all through here and not through here. Yeah? All right, so let's do some stuff with the sliders. They're gonna go on the hands. I just folded my yoga mat out of the way so I have some floor surface available to me. And I'm going to start by coming into my hands and knees. And I'm going to find that same press into the ground where I'm thinking about pressing through the back of my arm from my armpit, rather than locking out and hyperextending my elbows, which takes me out of that upper arm connection. So again, if you've got the tape, we're reaching into the tape. And then I'm going to slide one arm forward. The other arm is just going to bend out to the side. And I'm going to draw it back in. Now the slide, there's a couple different things I'm thinking about. There's that sense of coming under, like there's something in front of my shoulder. And there's that sense of reaching into the tape and reaching that side of the arm down. I can do this and stay pretty square with my shoulders. And when I come up, I'm thinking a little bit more about moving from my back than I am trying to pull my arm in. I can also do this where I allow the reach of my arm to start rotating my trunk. That feels kind of good too. And you could even do this with both arms. And I'm kind of letting my booty sit back. And I've got that same, I'm trying to drop my shoulders under something and reach my armpits for the floor. Feel, as I was just talking about. So another way that I really like to integrate this connection is by moving our arms out to the side, right? We get super focused on this range of motion doing circus for real reasons. But our arms still do move in all of these different ways, and it's really important for us to be strong in all of them, even if we're doing a ton of stuff here and here, right? We still want to be strong here, 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 right? All of these different places we should have strength in. So we're going to do kind of a rowing sort of motion. And I've got the band anchored solar plexus-ish, mid-trunk-ish, play around with it. And I'm going to hold on to it. I like to give it a little bit of a wrap because I'm going to turn my hands away, right? So having it wrapped around my hands gives me something to kind of push into here. And I'm going to let my elbows be soft and open. And then I'm going to pull my arms apart and let my hands come back together. Now, while I'm pulling, I'm thinking about reaching from here, right? So the reach is happening here, 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 not on the top. Well, that looks like this. And I'm kind of thinking like I'm trying to pull the wall in front of me apart with my hands. My fingertips are pointing towards each other and I'm sliding the wall apart, or if you had like sliding doors in front of you, that you're opening them. So another way that you can do essentially the same exercise is to come back to the floor on the hands and knees. And now I'm going to have my fingers pointing in towards each other. I'm going to reach out through my elbows. And again, I'm thinking about reaching through the back of my arm. So if I was there with you, I might put my hand on my elbow or on your elbow and ask you to try to reach your elbow into my hand and maintain space at the neck, right? We don't want to feel the chest or the top of the shoulder get all grippy. And then, got my elbows a little bit soft, I'm going to try to pull the floor apart. And then I can just let my hands turn and come back. So my fingertips turn in, my elbows soften and widen. They're reaching out. And then I'm thinking about pulling from that armpit, back of the arm place, like my elbows are trying to reach towards either side of the room. And I can come back up. Keeping a little bit of push into the ground can be helpful with this. So to take this into our hanging skills, we're going to do just a shrug or a scap wrap hanging from the bar. So I've got my pull-up bar here. You could do this, on whatever. So I'm going to come into my hanging position. And now, instead of thinking about this kind of up and down, sliding my shoulder blades around that a lot of people do when they're doing this movement, instead, we're going to start thinking about the rib cage, right? And thinking about trying to press the rib cage back. And then I'm almost trying to push the bar in front of me and turn my armpits in towards my cheeks. And I'm going to let myself hang. So my ribs are moving back. My arms are almost trying to go forward. And this ends up being a whole lot like that very first thing that we did with the yoga strap, where we were letting ourselves kind of passively hang from the arms. We're trying to find a very similar connection, only now it's active. So that was a fair amount of stuff about hanging. Let's talk a little bit about pushing and how that would work into a handstand. So this, we're going to come onto the hands and knees. And we already talked about that sense of pressing into the ground, almost like you're trying to come around something that's coming in front of your shoulder. So we're reaching from here. If you've got the type, right, we're thinking about pressing through that back of the arm spot. And when we do this, you know, if you were going to do like a cat and cow sort of motion, notice that when I have this push, right, I can't go up into my upper back in the same way. And that pulls my shoulders closer to my ears. It closes off the front of my chest. It shortens my neck. And my low back does not need to be particularly involved. So if I push instead, finding all that stuff we've talked about, and then I go to flex my spine, it's a much different picture. And I actually have to be able to really move my low back in a way that I don't have to if I'm doing it like this. So we're going to find that push, and then we're going to tuck the toes. And just like when we were sliding the arm forward and thinking about kind of scooping the armpit and reaching the armpit towards the floor, we're going to find the same feeling. But now the scoop of the armpit is going to lift the hips. You're still pushing, but you're pushing through the back of the arm versus pushing from the neck, which looks like this. I'll show you this way in case that was not super clear. So here's my scoop from under the arm. This is the way we're trying to learn. And I maintain space at my neck. And when I press from the neck, it's like this. And I lose all that space. So this is a way to start thinking about how would you find that in a handstand. And you could walk your feet closer and work on that push. I'm really thinking about pushing from the armpit. So I'm pushing from here, almost like my armpit could push my arm up instead of trying to lift my arm from here. And when we find the push that way, we're changing from kind of sliding our shoulders around the rib cage up and down to pushing our rib cage away from our shoulders, right? So here, this is just me kind of sliding, and it doesn't do a whole lot. Like, I'm certainly moving up and down. But the way that I can push my body this way is so much more effective, and it's really actually pressing my rib cage up above my shoulders in a way that I just can't access when I'm doing this and just kind of sliding my shoulder blades around the back of the ribs. So my suggestion is, because I'm not going to do a handstand right now because I'm not warm, is to play around with this and finding this, bringing your head more and more closer to your arms, and then come up into a handstand facing the wall. And you're thinking about pushing from the armpit, and almost like you're trying to open your armpit towards the wall while maintaining that push that keeps the space by the neck. All right? So give that a shot. See how it goes. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it gave you some ideas of things to play with in your own practice. As I mentioned previously, none of these exercises are meant to be like conditioning exercises that you're doing for sets or reps. These are all things that you would be doing to help you start to create a new pattern, to feel something in a different way. So you could do these during your warm-up at the beginning of your training, and then see if you can continue to apply the concepts that you are feeling in your body into your work on the apparatus. I know for me and for a lot of my students, this idea and this connection has been a real game changer in how we are working through these power skills or working on straight arm skills. So hopefully you have a similar experience. I would love to hear from you if you had any revelations, or if you thought this was all bullshit. I guess you can tell me that too. But I really hope it was helpful. And if you have any questions or you just want to say hey, feel free to reach out. I'd really love to hear from you. Bye.